And next, we shift our focus to a very important topic: sanctified influence, Russia's soft power by stealth. The session will explore how Russia's soft power works through stories, symbols, and influence, making it one of the most dangerous fronts of competition today. Moderating this panel is Buziashvili, Research Associate of the Atlantic Council, DFRLab. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to be joining you all today in Budva for these very important conversations and to moderate the panel. We have an all-star panel. Today we're joined with Kadri Liik, who is a Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. She is focusing on Russia, Eastern Europe, and Baltics region. And we have Miroslav Sazdovski, who is a Senior Analyst at the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. He focuses on influence operations targeted at Balkans. So, the Balkans region. It's a very active link on Russia's hybrid infrastructure when it comes to Europe. Russia, unfortunately, uses its territory for territorial gains, for logistical channels, for local actors to conduct Kremlin operations targeting Europe broadly. We have seen Kremlin operations that were kind of organized on this territory, which were paramilitary trainings, for example, targeting elections and aimed at disrupting elections. We have seen a wide range of false flag operations aimed at destabilizing Europe and sowing division. And we have seen some surveillance operations conducted from this region. So before we dive deeper into specific tactics that the Kremlin uses to target the region, let us zoom a bit and see the big picture. And Kadri, I want to start with you. So what is the strategic value that Balkans has for Russia's geopolitical ambitions, and how is the Kremlin actually aiming this region into its broader hybrid operations?
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here and address the audience and learn about the country. I really appreciate being invited. As to your question, in my view, Russia has always viewed the Balkan countries as allies in the anti-Western policies. I don't think it has had any grand plans for the Balkans. It doesn't intend to dominate the Balkans the way it tends to dominate some countries in the neighborhood. But Russia has always viewed the Balkans as convenient allies in anti-Western policies and activities. Paradoxically, in that sense, I don't think Russia's policy has ever even changed. That was the case already in the 1990s, when Russia itself was aspiring to join the West. But I remember conversations in Moscow in mid-90s with fairly influential people who said that, yeah, Slobodan Milosevic, he might be unpleasant, but he's our strategic ally. And I didn't understand it at all, because at that time, Russia's own nominal policies were focused on joining the West, holding up human rights, democracy, etc. And yet they were lending their support to someone who was doing the exact opposite. So in that sense, I think Russia's outlook on the Balkans has been fairly stable. But of course, as Russia's relationship with the West has deteriorated, they have tried to use the Balkans more as anti-Western bulwark, using the opportunities that open up. And we can discuss, how many of these operations are really Kremlin's policy. I think we have also seen a lot of political entrepreneurship, people improvising, hoping to please the Kremlin with their actions done here. But that sort of thing has always been happening. And now, of course, when Russia really feels that its standoff with the West is existential, we can only hope all that to intensify.
Let me turn to you, Miroslav. Kadri has been describing how actually the politics hasn't been changed, and Balkans has always played a big role when it comes to Russia's geopolitical ambitions. Let us zoom in a bit on the tactics. Like how Russia, and I have two-dimensional questions for you. First, like how is Russia instrumentalizing the Balkans to destabilize Europe more broadly? And the second question is, like, at the same time, how is Russia targeting Balkans itself?
Well, this is sort of a timely question, and it would have been quite difficult if... What? I guess it doesn't work?
Yeah, I think so.
Should I try to speak louder, or should we try to fix this?
Maybe we have an additional backup mic? Because Miroslav should mention very important topics so that everybody should hear that.
Hand microphone, maybe. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, this is better. So, it's a timely question in terms of recent development. It would have been quite difficult to, it would have been more difficult to explain this question previously, because we would have to quote some reports that we are following as a counter-hybrid community, but these days is quite maybe easily. We have two, how to say, wave of arrests that has happened in Serbia, which quite easily depicts how this region is actually being handled by hybrid actors, by world hybrid actors. So the first one was that two people were arrested for organizing trainings, actually for quite a lot of Moldovans, to prepare them for the elections which have just finished, to prepare them for unrest, to prepare them to destabilize the country, to prepare them to conduct unrest on the elections day and around elections. And interestingly, however mimic this or however blatant these arrests we can discuss that, how mimic they are, but they quite precisely depict how what we as a counter-hybrid community have been speaking about, and that is that the region of Western Balkans is actually being used as a fertile ground for nurturing and training such activities. Second one was actually again in Serbia. Arrested 11 people who, the story behind is that they have been the one that have organized and implemented the Paris or around France attacks, hybrid attacks on Muslim communities. So they were putting, I don't know, pigs' heads in front of mosques, or they have written anti-Islamic narratives on walls with paint and everything. And these hybrid activities were part of a larger, that we know, a larger hybrid attack, a large hybrid campaign. And they were again arrested in Serbia. So this quite depict that Western Balkan has been used for a longer time, not only as a training camp, but also as an experimental area where hybrid activities are being experimented before they are implemented in the more, let's say, resilient societies. And that's the first line, like direct attack of what Europe is actually faced with here in the Balkans, where they don't have, they have like the middle ground, or say, let's say the gray area. The second one is actually that Russia is trying to keep the Western Balkan as some kind of unstable area, so that EU has a problem nurturing this instability, right? And this is something that we have heard on these panels. This is something that has been their goals for a long time, maybe made from the beginning, when we say beginning when the dissolution of USSR probably. And this goes in line with one, I want to explain this one pattern on which Russia actually works. And this pattern is that Russia does not really impose, does not really create its own like genuine policies. It takes some Western institute or policy or activity and practice, and then, you know, put it in a formula, and then creates its own similar one. And this has been done from the very beginning. Like they take some, And they strip it out of, I don't know, liberal values. And they do whatever it takes in order to serve the Putin's regime. And that's the pattern that they're using. This is the formula. So that's why when we speak about soft power, which is the subject of this panel, we need to consider that when Russia is doing soft power activities, it's actually not the same as soft power activities that we are used to in the democratic societies. Soft power is a luxury of very strong countries, rich countries, countries who have power, but also who have values and have attractive power. That's the power to attract societies like Montenegro, like North Macedonia, to become part of that group. Russia does not even try to do that because it's not their goal. They have took that, let's say, practice of soft power. They have created their own, which serves their regime. And that is, on the contrary, they are just trying to fight all the elements which create prospect for the region to be part of that alliances in order to keep it away. And this is the basics of how we follow hybrid threats and activities. And this is what I find is the most, let's say, a direct involvement of Russia in the region in order to keep this region away from the European integration.
Yeah, you mentioned many interesting tactics in your introductory remarks, and I want to touch upon one very important topic, which is religious institutions when it comes to this region. Religious institutions in Balkans carry more political weight than in broader Europe. What is the current role of the religious institutions, and what do you think it should be when it comes to democratic resilience? Kadri, let's start with you.
Well, when it comes to Russian Orthodox Church and the way it acts inside Russia, but also in foreign policy, I think sadly they have completely allied themselves with the Kremlin and its goals. Partly it is traditional to Russian Church historically. They have always tended to side with the state, but hardly ever as absolutely as now. You could see how the Patriarch, Kirill, he still tried to sort of hedge between his religious community and the Kremlin when Putin announced annexation of Crimea in 2014. In that big ceremony in the Kremlin, the Patriarch didn't turn up because he realized that it hits hard his congregation in Ukraine. However, I think by now he has entirely clearly sided with the Kremlin, and Orthodox priests are blessing the missiles that are used to hit Ukraine. There are still probably some clergymen who serve the God instead of the Kremlin, but they are quite quiet, or they have been sacked. A number of them have been asked to leave, not to serve. And I find it very sad because I think the Orthodox Church would be much more powerful if it actually focused on serving the God and believers as opposed to the Kremlin. And I really wonder, I think they will take a strong hit when President Putin departs eventually and something changes in Russia. So, yeah, that's the case, and it really makes me sad. I think their own standing would be much stronger if they did what they are called for.
Absolutely. Miroslav, could you follow up on the role of the religious institutions? And I will follow up with my question about Russian Orthodox Church's role in this region in general.
Yeah. Well, let me continue where it was mentioned, the role of the Russian Orthodox Church. You know, we need to take into account one thing, that out of 2009, Russia is actually the official peer firm of the Russian military. And that has been imposed with the law and with an agreement done by President Medvedev in 2009. And previously, let's say in 2003, there was a working group between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Foreign Affairs of Russia for their joint operations everywhere. Russian Orthodox Church has its own Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well, which is, okay, let's say, with such a big institution, it has to have some kind of unit, but the operations are different. Anyway, what this nexus between Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian country actually created is bridging the gap between the values which Russia lost with the loss of the big Soviet country with high influence. And the Russian Orthodox Church actually came as ideology of duchovnosti, of spirituality, so that it gave values to what actually those regimes were trying to impose. And that's interestingly when we speak about the Balkans. There's also one correlation which is quite obvious, and it is with the dissolution of Yugoslavia. You find a lack of, how to say, a power to impose policies of Serbia inside the sphere of influence that it feels that it had belonged to. And those two elements actually created a quite firm bond between the mechanics of how those countries actually impose their policies. So you have the Ruski Mir, which is the Russian world, which implies that the Russian Orthodox Church should not only take care about the Russians, but rather to all Orthodox citizens or all Orthodox communities around Russia. And they have specifically even mentioned how they will do it in Ukraine or in Belarus or whatever, but they don't stop there. They create partnership with the Russian Orthodox Church, or with the Serbian Orthodox Church, sorry. And then they impose that, because it will be difficult for Russians to go and work here in the region. Of course they do, but that's really the smaller portion. The bigger portion is actually the nexus, the partnership they create with the Serbian Orthodox Church, for them to impose the same policy as they're doing it on the global level, for Serbian Orthodox Church to do it in the regional level. And to be honest, that's not only limited to the church, but rather to different type of institutions which are present here in the region.
Yeah, and as Kadri was mentioning, the representatives of Russian Orthodox Church are blessing weapons intended for 3-day military operation in Ukraine, which is already continuing for 3 years, and it seems that it is not working, those blessings. But do you think that the narratives that are spread by the representatives of Orthodox Church resonate in this? Because the narrative that we are observing is like traditional values, which they claim that do not really correlate with the EU and the West and the NATO. Do you think that these narratives correlate in societies when it comes to the Balkans?
If I may build up on what Kadri actually mentioned previously, that it would be nice if we can see the religious organization working more on connections of the people with God, rather than create politics. So even in this regards, protection of the Eastern values, which is the main narrative of what Ruski Mir and what actually Serbian world should create in the region and Ruski Mir should create in globally, are actually again mimicking what true meaning of imposing values should be. And let me be honest, they're not really attracting anybody. People are not attracted by the opinion that they will want to join that kind of narratives and be part of that system, network of values. They are more afraid of the conspiracies, of the hostile narratives, that by embracing the Western societies, by embracing the Western allied network, they are actually more importing the deviant form of Western societies. And these are the narratives that actually communicate more easily, and these are not narratives of attraction, but rather narratives of fear. They're coming and to get you, you will lose your ground. So it's a narrative of fear, and not a narrative of attraction. Even the biggest Russophiles in the region are not really attracted by Russia, let's be honest. They're just, cautious, not to be infected by the deviant values that come from the West.
Please, Kadri.
Yeah, no, on traditional values, I find it really ironic that Russia now poses as upholder of traditional values, because I remember how it started. I mean, the narrative started as Putin's way to marginalize Russia's urban intelligentsia back in 2011, when people came out to demonstrate against his return to the Kremlin. His announcement that they will swap positions with Dmitry Medvedev launched the protests, and that led to this kind of rhetoric emanating from Russia. So it was actually a domestic PR move to start with, and I think they themselves were surprised to see that it actually worked very well as a foreign policy instrument, because it coincided with certain trends and certain cultural wars in the West, and then they started using it more consciously. But as to Russia and traditional values, well, it's a very mixed picture. I mean, if you look at even at the Kremlin, there are people there who are in same-sex relationships. There are people there in extramarital relationships. I mean, I won't go into details, but you can Google. We all know that.
We can Google together.
Yes, yes. So I would say that Russia's cultural heritage, when it comes to that, is sort of distinctly Soviet. Homosexuality has been stigmatized, whereas abortion was main means of family planning throughout the Soviet time, and I think well into independent Russia. But yeah, they made that the rhetorical line, but we shouldn't buy it at face value. Also, the notion that Western liberalism is all about sort of transgender ideology. It's not. It is true that there are cultural wars in the West around these issues, but reducing the whole Western democratic liberal model to that is caricature.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to elaborate on what Miroslav was saying. The fear is very strong sentiment. Another thing that we are observing in the broader Eastern Europe, the narrative that Russia is pushing is the fear of war, that if you are not with Russia, there will be a war. We're seeing the same in Moldova, in Georgia. Even now, we have heard these narratives in Hungary as well, since Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine. And with this, I want to turn to another important topic and kind of player when it comes to this region. It's EU. I want to ask this question to both of you. Like, how do you think EU can support local actors in this region? Those actors who are resisting democratic erosion, and if we look at the situation through security lenses, how should Brussels be setting up its priorities when it comes to the Balkan regions? Kadri, you want to start?
Yeah. Well, I think democracy actually starts at home, and the EU can do a lot to help it, but it cannot do everything. I mean, we have seen that when also EU countries themselves have strayed from the path and succumbed to authoritarian tendencies, the EU cannot do much. I mean, yes, it can do statements, withhold money, we have seen that, but ultimately it's up to the population, and I think it's tricky. I mean, you need strong political leaders who can live in the circumstances of democratic scrutiny, who don't mind checks and balances regardless of our inconvenience, and so forth. So I think in the big picture, the best thing the EU can do is actually to rejuvenate democracy in its own countries. Because democracy needs to be reinvented once again, now that we are in the era of social media, AI, big corporations, so forth. Everything is changing, and global power shifts. So I think it's important to actually make democratic governance model fit for these times, and that's much more than just observing stuff, rules and procedures. We should really go back to being, I don't know, ancient Greece or Iceland, and discuss, is democratic government best for us, and why, and what it should deliver, and how. And then I think it should give the Balkans clear accession perspective and make democracy attractive and make it clear that Balkans can be part of it. All the rest is technicality. Yeah, I mean, you can support pro-democracy, civil society groups, offer training, etc., etc., etc. And that is being done already, but I don't think that's decisive. I think there are more fundamental things that need to be fixed.
Yeah, you mentioned the support, and I think that there is this global tendency where we're seeing that the Western funding when it comes to democratic resilience is shrinking, and I guess the same goes to this region. So this area remains one of the challenges when it comes to the support, the actual support on the ground. Miroslav, what would you say?
Well, I can agree that building democracy actually starts from home, and but we have to be clear that there's a quite powerful, I'd say not that powerful country, but a rather powerful hybrid actor, which tries to stop that. And yeah, there are things that Brussels should do. First of all, it's their neighborhood. And usually when I speak about the role of the Western Balkan in the European security architecture, I usually have a picture of where is Western Balkan inside the EU map. And, you know, because from back in the days, EU had some kind of impression that enlargement process is actually happening somewhere in the periphery of the continent. Well, actually, it's not. Because European Union has enlarged already in terms of dimension. Now it needs to wrap up the process. And because Western Balkans is now inside Europe. That's why when we were talking about how is Russia actually destabilizing, it's destabilizing within this region because it's inside, geographically, it's inside Europe. And this is why I still find that the role of the European Union in development of the Western Balkans is very, very much important. And as the history has taught us, and when I speak history, I speak the recent history which goes decades back, that the accession process, the integration process into the EU is the most powerful transformational force that we have seen so far anywhere in the world. And we should not limit Western Balkans of that force. On the contrary, that's the soft power that should be cherished. That's the soft power that actually attracts all those countries. Even today, all the panelists has actually speak about how can European Union actually be more relevant player in the Western Balkans by using its soft power. And that's the power of attraction. That's the real soft power, not the mimic one. In these regards, I see two approaches really important for the EU. One is the strategic approach, which they have all seen it. It was discussed previously, and that is in terms of the position the European Union is going to take on those countries that are not now in a negotiation process, which can be a game change for them. Because if they feel disappointed, that will open the door for a lot of hybrid activities. But if they have been accepted, that will close a lot of doors that are now open. And this is true, it has been said.
Yeah, it's a security lens.
Yeah, second one is, there is integration process behind the lights, which actually connects the institutions of the countries in questions with the EU institutions. And this process is the real integration. It goes with the stabilization and association agreement. It goes with negotiations, depending on which country, where it is. That process can be fueled. That process can be increased, even without membership. Because we all speak about, membership. We create slogans, 28 countries, but there's integration even without membership. And that integration means being part of the foreign policy, EU foreign policy, being part of the security network. Montenegro, North Macedonia are now part of NATO. They have now felt how it is to be inside and being part of the security network. They should be part also as negotiating countries and countries who are quite close to become members, Albania as well, as They should be part of the process of defining EU policies. And this is not a new subject. It has been mentioned from once in a while. It should not be in exchange for the membership, but it should help the countries become more part of this allied network. And yeah, I think that can be done. And Brussels should take more, I think they should take more emphasis on this policy.
I wanted to quickly check time. I'm a Georgian and we have time management problems in Georgia. I just have like very brief question before we turn to the audience. I wanted to follow up with the mechanisms that the governments can use in this region to fight foreign malign influence, but also to not undermine the civil rights and civil liberties, because there is always this thin line to be walked. Miroslav, please.
Yeah, this is something that we, the hybrid CEO, we are actually quite engaged on. That is creating the counter-hybrid posture of the countries. We work on enhancing capacities of our member states, which are all NATO and EU countries, to create their own counter-hybrid posture. This is our job. So basically, we have this core model, which is a comprehensive resilience model, which focuses on the key values that we as a counter-hybrid community are protecting. And those values are democracy. Those values are the essence of what makes our society democratic, like political accountability, stability, predictability as well. And what these countries can do. First of all, they need to raise the questions of organizing themselves to counter hybrid threats more seriously than they're doing. And that's, let me be honest, there is a change. Because we're monitoring, in particular, I'm monitoring the countries of the Western Balkans. We are constantly in contact with them. They're creating units, they're creating their force to analyze, to predict. And so that's the basics. And I think that we are past now the basics. Now, there's like a logical structure of what every country is doing in order to protect itself. That is, create alliances first, because in hybrid threats, it's the most important alliance is inside the country. So we have constantly mentioning, we need to create the whole of the government approach. Well, do it. Create your units under the prime minister, under the president, doesn't matter. Create your agencies, like Viginum in France, like everywhere it's created in the Western societies. Create your agency of coordination, because hybrid threats do not attack a single cell. They attack from everywhere. You need to create the whole of the government approach first, so the government can be coordinated. But then again, the most important part, because hybrid CEO is located in Helsinki, in Finland, and so I always try to present the comprehensive, resilient model of Finland or total defense of Sweden. I think there was a guy here from the Swedish Defense Agency. They have mastered the whole of society approach. And this is what creates stable and long-lasting resilience to hybrid threats.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Let me turn to the audience to collect a couple of questions, which I very much invite you to answer very briefly. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please, gentlemen, in the middle of the row.
I took the mic.
We have the mic.
Thank you very much. I'm Gregor Meyer. I'm a correspondent for the German press agency based in Belgrade and Budapest. I don't know if the distinguished panel feels competent in answering my question. My question is rather about negative influences coming out from Western countries into peripheral transformational countries, like business interests. For instance, in German companies bought a lot of Serbian media and Bulgarian, and then they resold them or gave them over to autocratic regimes. Or there's a EU country, Hungary, which has a quite openly pro-Russian orientation under its present leadership, which is buying huge interests for these small countries, huge economic interests. Like here in Montenegro, one of these mobile companies is owned by a Hungarian company which is under control of Prime Minister Orban. And there are many of them in the region.
Thank you, thank you. So basically the question is, if you could elaborate on some kind of negative influence when it comes to the western part of the world. Kadri?
Yeah, I think there can be negative influence, but again, in that case, I think it is crucial to have strong and legitimate governments at home that can actually regulate also results of business processes or decide to whom they privatize something or not, and by and large know what they are doing. I mean, for some reason, I think the Baltic states in that time got it right. I have followed how the Kremlin blames the West for bad economic advice that they got during the 1990s, and I think some of it is true. I think Western policy towards Russia focused very much on macroeconomics, whereas the plight of ordinary people was left out of focus, and I think a lot of what we are seeing in Russia reflects that. Then again, I remember Estonia also got quite some bad advice from Western institutions. Good advice as well, but bad as well. And somehow they had wisdom to ignore the bad advice. I don't know how and why, but they passed the test. They acted as they should have in the interest of their own country.
Thank you. Miroslav?
Yeah, in terms of hybridity, so I really don't know the example that you have asked for, whether or not it's been identified as hybrid activity or not. But let's be honest, the Western society, even though more resilient, are not immune to being penetrated, either through useful idiots, either through economic influence, or through other types of hybrid activity. And then backfire that, let's say, in the Balkans. That's okay, it can happen. And that's why they also need to work on, enhancing their posture and create more resilient societies. And to be a little bit more connected with the Balkans. The thing is that hybrids are, they work, the tools that they use in their work are quite on the fast pace. And the inertia that the European Union is having in their decision process actually is a vulnerability. So when you speak about security, you need to create mechanisms which can be more fast. And there is one, actually, which is quite good. It's called Common Foreign and Security Policy. And that is actually working, even though it can be amended, of course, it's working quite good in protecting the European Union. And in the accession process, European Union have asked the countries of the Western Balkans to align with that policy, which they, on like 4/5 of them, have aligned. Why are we tolerating? Why is the EU tolerating that? It shouldn't be a question whether or not you like it or not. There are some policies which you are not asked to be joined. You should have done it or not. You are on the other side. And European Union, as a political actor now in the region, if it wants to impose its own policy, it has to be more serious when implying that their policy has to be respected. Common security and foreign policy is one of that.
Thank you, thank you. Just to sum up the panel, 2 clear messages, clear integration promises, the clear plan, and reinventing democracy, as Kadri said. This conversation can be continued for many, many hours, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. Thank you so much, and join me in applause.